Shut up and sit down.
Hey, I'm Ellie.
And I am Simon.
And tonight we are going to review a movie, the trailer for which we watched a few weeks ago. We did a drunk trailer reaction.
And it was your choice.
It was my choice. I wanted to surprise you with a documentary about a movie that I loved growing up.
And me as well. It had been so long since we watched that movie. The documentary is called Life After the Navigator. And of course the movie is...
Flight of the Navigator.
Flight of the Navigator from 1986.
So long before I was born.
Yeah, and you know what? We decided not to score this movie, not to do that stupid nerdic thing we do with the judge's wig and the hammer. If you like that, watch it. But this one actually really got us in the feels, and we figured we would just talk about why we loved it. And as a bonus, we're going to have a live exclusive interview with the director, Lisa Downs, tomorrow. So if you come back tomorrow, see us talk to the director and gush about how much we loved it as well.
When I first heard about the concept of the documentary, I was expecting it to be a behind-the-scenes look of making the Flight of the Navigator. Obviously, it was groundbreaking with the special effects that they used. So I was expecting it to be all about putting that movie together. What we ended up getting was an incredible movie that wove together two stories. We did get some behind-the-scenes views of what it was like to make that movie.
And the Puckmarin.
We got to meet the cast. They had some behind-the-scenes shots from then and interviewing them now. But it was woven together with the story of the journey that the main star, Joey Kramer, went on.
My life after the Navigator has been pretty crazy.
He started off in this movie, he was just a 12-year-old star, and it followed his journey.
Randall had called me one day and said, "Did you hear about Joey?" And I said, "No, I hadn't."
What was it, a bank robbery?
I think people know that he went through a really challenging time, and the way they wove together the story of the challenges he went through.
When I saw what had happened, my heart broke.
It's not just a story about a kid actor that goes to jail. It's about what happened.
And at the same time, they were kind of following the journey of the movie, the making of the movie, the challenges they faced coming up with it, the inspirations they had while they're following the challenges he faced. And I found it really compelling, the contrast between the hope that he had when he was filming the movie with the challenges he faced afterwards, and overcoming the things that he faced, overcoming addiction, the criminal background that he has, kind of coming back to understanding who he is, who his family is, and coming to terms with his role in that movie and how important he is in a lot of people's lives, because that movie is incredibly important to a lot of people like me who grew up with it.
Why is Navigator so revered and special to so many?
Because it has heart.
Kids were always coming up to me saying, "Oh, you were the dad in Flight of the Navigator."
So the bit you would expect in this documentary is the Flight of the Navigator part, where you've got behind-the-scenes footage, never before seen before, interviews with the cast and crew, you've got details on how the props work, and that was actually really fascinating to me as a fan of the original movie. You had a lot of details around how they designed the ship, which was so iconic.
I wanted the spaceship to start out to have a certain configuration when it's hovering.
And not just in the shape of the ship and the fact that it morphed back and forth, but also the fact that the ship was reflective, and it was one of the first ever movies that used that kind of reflection mapping technology, so that when the ship's flying over the sea and you can see the clouds and the trees reflected in it, and that actually caused James Cameron to come up with the idea of the T-1000 Terminator in Terminator 2 Judgment Day. So there were some really awesome things around the special effects being cutting edge, but I also really liked the fact that they showed you how old school some of the special effects were as well.
It was a small set, and we had 4 weeks.
We built those steps with steel rods going away from the camera. You couldn't really do that with special effects.
A lot of the monsters that you see in the ship were old school marionette style puppets that had strings attached to them.
The Puckmarin, wow.
He was small.
You couldn't understand it.
And they did things like using smoke to hide the strings, and literally smoke and mirrors to hide the strings of the puppets, which was really awesome, that blend of really cutting edge with really traditional. And the other thing that I really liked about it was just how much reverence in every single interview you had from everybody from the director down to the kids who were involved in this movie. They just treated the movie with a kind of reverence.
It's a really fun movie with a great message about love and family.
It's another world in which anything is possible.
And I love the fact that they did that, because you get so many classic movies where people are over it and the cast kind of wish they could just move on and be known for something else. In this case, there was just a love for the project of Flight of the Navigator itself, and that just came through so clearly in the documentary.
When we do movies, it lasts forever.
It's lovely when they come up and they say, my favorite movie is Flight of the Navigator. It's not Alien, it's Flight of the Navigator.
So I think the Joey Kramer part, though, is more shocking, more heartbreaking, but also more uplifting and maybe even more useful in terms of what people take away from this documentary.
I was hoping that he would get a good kid, because it all depended on him.
You know, to me, it really shows you the reality behind what it must be like to be a child movie star. And I think there's this perception that, you know, kids are so lucky if they can make it big at a really young age and they're made for the rest of their life. But it was actually really insightful to see that, you know, kids at school are not going to think you're the coolest kid in the world because you've been in a blockbuster movie. You know, you're probably actually going to get bullied for that.
When I tried to go back to school and be normal, I was anything but normal.
I think Joey was on the verge of massive stardom, to be honest.
And also that Hollywood kind of commoditizes your youth. So the older you get, the further you get away from that kid star that you were, then the less value you have to Hollywood. And you know, you've pinned so much hope on that value as a kid that it kind of diminishes as time goes on.
Child actors always have problems.
It's almost like being typecast as a kid, and you grow out of being a kid.
And before I knew it, my childhood was gone.
Yeah, it almost feels like being set up for a fall, in that the expectations are so high that you just have no hope of meeting them.
Yeah. And, you know, really there are no punches pulled in this documentary, and I love that about it. It would have been very easy and probably seen as a caring thing to avoid some of the tougher subjects and, you know, that literally bring Joey Kramer to tears in this movie. But, you know, you've got things like his progression from, you know, being a 12-year-old kid addicted to smoking weed to being a 15-year-old addicted to cocaine and then moving on to heroin.
After I finished Navigator, I didn't really fit in, and I started smoking a lot of dope, I started drinking a lot. Do us all a favor and kill yourself.
And, you know, becoming in such a bad way that he was living on the street, sleeping in a car, literally had all of his teeth knocked out, and ends up robbing a bank. To go from that, the highs of mega stardom as a 12-year-old to those crushing lows it's really, really hard to watch.
And I spent some long nights down here. There were some pretty dark times, definitely.
But really important to watch to be able to understand his story.
And that he was able to be open about that part of his journey because he'd gone through the process of dealing with it himself and coming to terms with what he'd gone through. That he was, I wouldn't say he was comfortable talking about it, but he was open about the challenges that he went through, the bad choices that he made and the reasons he made them.
Those choices seem so silly to anybody who's clean and has been all their life.
Felt like I let a lot of people down.
And that he just talked about it because it happened, that there was no shying away. Like, he didn't cushion any of that. He didn't kind of blur any of the harsh edges. He just owned what he'd done. Talked a lot about how he reconnected with his family and with his friends and with the other co-stars from the movie. Like, it was a really unflinching look at what it takes to deal with addiction and with challenges and what comes with that. Like, what it takes to come out the other side and reconnect with who you were and with what the world is.
Another thing I loved about this documentary was that, as well as the unflinching look at Joey Kramer's life and his, as you say, his unflinching honesty about what he's done, and I think you see that in a lot of people who are recovering from addiction, is you kind of have to own it. You kind of have to own what you've done. Otherwise, how do you move on from it? But the other thing I loved about it was that they also took an unflinching look at the environments that he'd been in. They looked at the jail. You actually got to see the inside of the jail, which I have no idea. I can't wait to talk to the director, Lisa, and find out how they actually got permission to film in a Canadian jail.
I was here with guys who had been in and out of jail for most of their lives.
They looked at the rehab facility that he was in for a long time, for years, and you got to see the work that he was doing coming back after recovering from addiction and actually help other people who were going through that process as well. So just seeing the environments that he had been in made it all so much more real. And you even got to see the bank that he robbed as he goes back there, which is, again, just heartbreaking, but also uplifting to see just how far he'd come from that terrible moment in time.
And that you could tell that it wasn't easy for him to go there. It was a really painful place for him to go, but that he just went there and he said, yep, this is what I did, and this is how it made other people feel, and this is how that makes me feel, and this is how I have tried to come to terms with it and tried to atone for it.
You know, any time that you get somebody who's been through hardship and comes out the other side, I think they have a special kind of wisdom. And like we'll be talking in another review coming up soon about homeless outreach that we've been involved in. And I never ceased to be amazed by the people that I met on the streets and the tales that they would tell. And despite the fact that they were still in a really, really bad place, just how wise some of them were, kind of looking back on their lives and mistakes that they'd made and the kind of lessons that they would share. And Joey Kramer was, you know, the epitome of that to me. He seemed so wise in the way he was looking at his life. And there were two things that really kind of jumped out at me from the documentary. The first one, and I'm going to paraphrase this and probably get it wrong, but there's a point where Joey stood in front of his mirror giving himself positive affirmations. And he says something along the lines of, everybody deserves to feel loved. And I think we all agree with that. Everybody deserves to feel loved. But then he went on to say, by themselves.
I love you, Joe. I love you.
And it really struck me, like, how many people can look at themselves in the mirror and actually tell themselves that they love themselves? Like, it's a very peculiar thing that everybody should be able to do, but I think so few people are able to do.
The more we say it, the better it feels.
And I was really, really struck by the wisdom in that message. And then the other piece of wisdom that really struck me was at the very end of the documentary.
I was the movie star kid who had no identity, and now I do. Now I do.
I love that message that, you know, going through hard times doesn't diminish who you are as a person. It increases who you are as a person and just adds to your value.
And that you can learn from the choices that you've made previously. They don't define you, that you can own them, that can be who you were, and it doesn't need to be who you are, that you can move on from it, that you can atone for it, that you can accept, yeah, that happened, and I don't like that it happened, but I can't make it not have happened, and like that can inform your choices moving forward.
Yeah, and that people forgiving you and people loving you is awesome, but the important thing is to be able to forgive yourself and love yourself. And that message really resonated with me in this documentary. So we're not going to score this documentary because, honestly, if you're a fan of Flight of the Navigator, you're going to love it. And if you're a fan of people going through hard times and coming out the other side, you're also going to love it.
If you love Flight of the Navigator, then watching Life After Flight of the Navigator is going to really inform, kind of add to that enjoyment of the movie, because it does give you behind the scenes things and explains a lot about how they achieved certain effects and how they made certain decisions in the movie, which is incredible. But it also appeals to people who maybe have gone through hardships themselves, or just like those kind of inspiring stories of people going through challenges and how they face them and what you can learn from, you know, the choices other people have made. If you're the kind of person who's watching this channel now, you understand the complexities of things, and this movie is probably going to be something that you enjoy
And the good thing is that it's available on Amazon Prime Video right now for free. So you can go watch it. But tomorrow we're going to be doing a live interview with the director, Lisa Downs, asking her a whole bunch of questions about making the documentary, about her Life After Movies franchise, what she's got coming next, and what it was like working with the awesome Joey Kramer. So we will see you then, but until then, go fire up Flight of the Navigator and then watch Life After the Navigator. We can guarantee that you will love both. Until then...
Peace out, Navigators.
Compliance!
Shut up and sit down.